Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Ready to go ahead and get started?
Sure thing.
Alrighty. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentleman Character Discussions. I'm Sid Part 2, joining me today is...
A geek for fun.
Indeed. Alfie, who are we doing a discussion on today?
We are doing a discussion on a very popular character, probably one of the most in recent memory of pop culture, who's kind of taken the fandom by storm in both a, oh, we love him sense and also we hate him sense. Someone with a lot of talk that doesn't seem to have died down even in light of recent events. It's only gotten worse and worse. So I think he's a very topical discussion to have now that I'm very glad you didn't do prior, because now that the main thing is done, we can actually dive into it. And with that long ramble over and done, we're talking about Kylo Ren, Ben Solo.
Indeed. So, Kylo Ren is probably one of the things that even people who didn't like the sequel trilogy will admit that Kylo Ren's a pretty interesting character, I think. Not the people that, like, vehemently hate the sequel trilogy for, like, you know, oh, there's clearly, like, this in a frame for 1 second, or people that complain about anything, but, like, people who just generally didn't like the sequel trilogy will even kind of say, you know, Kylo Ren, though, he's kind of cool. And it's interesting because he's also, like, not a one-to-one copy, but, there are only so many ideas. But he does seem to come off as almost like a reworked or improved version of some of the stuff done in the original Legends Star Wars stuff of Luke, or not Luke, not Luke and Leia, it's Han and Leia having a kid together, and that kid kind of going to the dark side, yada yada yada.
With Jason and Jaina basically becoming revamped, remixed versions for Rey and Kylo, obviously without the sibling relation thing. Well, that was a big theory for a couple of movies there. It's one of the things that Disney's been doing that I'm a really big fan of, because I don't like, especially once you get past that initial, like, oh, we're a few years after the Return of the Jedi. Once you do like the big, oh, we're 20 years after Return of the Jedi, the EU then just completely falls off for me. It's just not what I'm into Star Wars for, like the Yuuzhan Vong and all of that. I'm just, it's not for me. But taking ideas from that, I think, is a very good idea, because if we are gonna still have them in the legends, and if there are legends of these things, then why not just remix it and see if you can mine something else for other creatives to take a stab at? Because the idea of Han and Leia having a kid is really just interesting, for given their dynamic in the original trilogy. It's just, they are a very unique fictional couple, and they might not be the best parents just because they have great chemistry. And showing that in two different cases, I think, is interesting, where Jason kind of fell to the dark side of his own volition, but he had kind of like the typical perfect childhood, whereas Ben is directly tied into the character flaws of Luke, Leia, and Han, which I think is, for me, it's a more interesting take to really delve into what would their legacy be with the lessons they learnt in the original trilogy and the flaws of those lessons that they didn't know about because they didn't get to watch the prequels. I think all of that's great. And then you get in Last Jedi where Luke now has watched the prequels and he's like, fuck, man. All of this is bullshit. Did you not see what Darth Sidious just did? Like, that's why I really
Yoda was flipping and stuff. He doesn't flip.
Yeah.
He rides on your back while you do flips.
It's just Luke's just so pissed because he's just watched the prequels. It's how you justify Last Jedi. And then Kylo Ren hasn't watched the prequels, so he just thinks Darth Vader's a badass. All of that I think is very interesting looking at it from a 9-film saga. And just on the character of Ben, all the protagonists of the sequel trilogy are kind of dealing with, okay, we're the inheritors of Star Wars. We're the legacy of Star Wars as like a very meta sense of new filmmakers playing with Star Wars. Is like Rey's the scavenger and she just hears the legends of Luke and then she meets it and deals with it, yada, yada, yada. For Ben, he's probably the most obvious version of that, where he is the Star Wars fanboy in Star Wars. Mm-hmm. He is the Darth Vader fan who's on the comics message board talking about how Darth Vader can kill Superman because Darth Vader's the best. Fuck you, I'm right. Kind of idea brought into a Darksider who's trying his hardest to be one, but he's just not made to do that. Which, again, is such a... You see these characters like Darth Maul, Count Dooku, even Vader and Sidious. They're all kind of... Anakin was trying his best not to go to the dark side, but he just kept falling into it because it was what he was good at. You get Ben, and he's the exact opposite, which is such an interesting take in Star Wars, where it's all about the pull to the dark side. It kind of tempts you. Is we never really thought about having a character just bad at it, but desperately wants to be the dark side.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of the few things from Rise of Skywalker that I did quite like, because it does feel like one of the things that is set up, that he was manipulated into it more than he realizes. You know, I have been every voice in your head. That whole thing. Like, I actually quite like that detail, because it makes sense that you always have the temptation of the dark side, but there's also this idea that not everyone is cut out to be a Sith. Not everyone's cut out to be a dark side user. Sometimes you're just not a good enough person to be a Jedi, you know? And I think that's a really... That's kind of where Ben Solo fits in, which was interesting because he's simultaneously not good enough to be a Sith, and he's better at it than everyone else except for Palpatine. You know? Like, he kills his master successfully. And apparently, from what I can tell, his first attempt. He, you know, takes control of the galaxy. He uses his anger in his fights to pretty great damn effect for the most part. He commits to the dark side actions more than anyone else. Like, by the end of The Last Jedi, Kylo Ren is at the position that Vader wanted to be. He's at the position that Palpatine was. It's a little unfortunate they didn't do much with that by the time you got to Last Jedi. Or not Last Jedi, I'm sorry, Rise of Skywalker. But I think that's like such a cool thing to do, is like, you can be really bad at the dark side, but just by its very nature, it can propel you to these heights, which I thought was kind of a cool idea.
And what I think is interesting about those things in specific is, I feel like, yes, just on like an idea level of Kylo Ren does achieve more in the grand scheme than Vader does. I think how I always view that, at least, is the dark side as a idea will always give you what you think you need, but will basically construct a very personal hell for you. Darth Maul was quite successful and quite powerful, but he's always doomed to fail. Dooku didn't believe in the Republic and wanted to make something better, and his actions led to the Empire, which is infinitely worse. Vader did want to have those ruling over Palpatine and everything. It's just because he spent his entire life a slave, and he would never be denied that power, and he had that idea of being freedom. Even in his Jedi Council, he saw himself as a slave, and just the one act he was free is when he had a child, and he wanted to give that child more freedom than he had, and it propelled him to make the sacrifice. Kylo Ren doesn't really want to rule for those reasons like Vader did. If anything, he was begging for someone to tell him what to do. So at the end of The Last Jedi, he's in a much worse place emotionally than he is at the start, where he can, especially in Force Awakens, where he's like, the Supreme Leader is wise, he's telling me to do all these things, and that's where that initial bit in Force Awakens when we first see him, it's probably the most calm, cool, and collected we ever see Kylo Ren. Is when he's got the mask on, he's in his element, he's following orders, and he doesn't have to worry about all this personal bullshit that he's really not all of that. The moment he doesn't have his mask on and now he has to become the Supreme Leader, he doesn't care about all of that, and he's making tactical mistakes because all he wants is to get revenge on Luke, and then he wants to get Rey on his side, and it shows you how he's just not cut out of it, where the dark side almost is propelling him up because they know he's not good at it, he's gonna fuck it up, whereas Vader, if he ruled the Empire, would be very efficient. So I almost view it in a different way than like saying, oh, he's good at it. It's just the dark side has picked a different ironic punishment for him.
Yeah, I think that's, those two things mesh together really well, right? And that's the thing that was so interesting about Kylo Ren, and that whole scene in The Force Awakens is probably the best scene in Force Awakens to me, with Kylo Ren talking to Vader's helmet. And you just have that like, I feel the pull to the light again. And actually, you know, for as much as I disagree with bringing Palpatine back, for a number of reasons in Rise of Skywalker, the idea of Palpatine reaching out through the voice of Darth Vader in order to manipulate his grandson, I think that is just a fantastically like tragic way to build a character. And I do think it's really interesting that like he wants to be a light side user, he wants to be a good person, but he's been manipulated into this viewpoint that he can't be. And that's something I find really fascinating.
I think one of my favorite moments in Rise of Skywalker is when he confronts Rey on the Death Star, and very much the same way when Vader's like, it's too late for me, son, he is your master now. And he's just kind of, you just, in that sentence, you get entirely that Darth Vader's given up and he's this husk of a man, and this is why Palpatine's got him on that leash. When Kylo Ren says, you can't go back to them, just like me, you follow, everything's laid out there, is he feels like he's gone too far, and obviously after he kills Han, it's even more so. And being a Supreme Leader, he probably did a lot of dodgy shit as well. But even before that, the moment he pulls the hood down on Luke, and in the Rise of Kylo Ren comic, we see that he thinks he's the one who blew up the Jedi Temple with all the students, but it was like a dark cloud that's probably Palpatine, because no one else is using lightning on that scale, so I'm just gonna say it's Palpatine, or 4 was being quite drunk and messed up. That happens. Kylo Ren immediately thinks, oh god, I must have done this, because he's a naive kid and he doesn't know what's happening, and he runs away and he goes into the arms of Snoke, who is like, oh, don't worry, we'll make you better, we'll sort this out. Very much the same way as Anakin, is just the grooming of this child by making them think they don't deserve to be happy. They don't deserve to have a forgiveness and isolation. So I think that's very telling for Kylo. In one of my things that I do think is an issue, and it's not just with the movies, I think this is just the basic storytelling thing, is I think they made him too old, because all of that happens when he's like 23. And I'm just like, that would be so much more powerful if he was like 15.
I think they just didn't want to cast a 15-year-old Kylo Ren, to be honest. I think that's what it is. I think they wanted it to be Adam Driver, and they couldn't really sell Adam Driver much younger than early 20s.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I still think it works. I just feel like I think a lot of people who do have a problem with Kylo Ren, and this is something I am interested to talk about, and just how divisive on did he deserve a redemption? Did he deserve even just to have a redemptive death? Because some people think shouldn't have died either. I know Matt's very strong feelings that Kylo Ren should have lived. And I think it's interesting why Vader didn't have this much debate about him, but Kylo Ren seems to have sparked another fan war. But the fact that Kylo Ren had that age thing, I think, is the main thing that makes a lot of people go, oh, well, he was a man. He made those decisions. It's not like Anakin, who was like an 8-year-old slave boy. It's like Kylo Ren for the majority of his life. He had some dodgy things. A lot of people bring up the thing from a novel where like a kitchen droid that was looking after him tried to kill him. And I just think that's just like Star Wars. If a droid's tried to kill you when you're a kid, that's just like living in that universe. Like, I don't put that on Han or Leia. But like, obviously they were absent parents a lot of the time because they were both very busy. So there is that in his childhood, but it's still not like growing up a slave on Tatooine level shit. So the fact that it took him till he's 20 and he's been trained by Luke, that then is his fall to the dark side, where everything else has been relatively-ish okay, is what I think stops a lot of people. But I don't know, where do you fall on that? Like, before Rise of Skywalker, were you in the camp that he should have been redeemed, or were you thinking he's going to go in full villain?
You know, after Last Jedi, I really thought that if he was going to take a redemption, that was going to be it. But then I heard a lot of arguments. It's like, no, like his whole story is just about like setting up a redemption. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, yeah, he probably will be redeemed in the 9th film. And ultimately we do get it. And it is when he comes full circle, you know, the Kylo Ren is dead, Ben Solo lives moment is very genuinely emotional. That all being said, I do think it was a mistake to kill him. I do feel like it does feel like the easy out. And you know, it's funny, not to bring everything back to Dragon Ball, but to bring everything back to Dragon Ball, Fusion made a really good point in a video they did recently, about a year ago maybe, about Vegeta's redemption in Dragon Ball, and how, like, when Darth Vader is redeemed, he dies right away, but Vegeta gets a redemption arc, and yet he gets to live and be happy. But if Vader got to live, then he would be put on trial for, like, war crimes, and he'd probably end up being executed and stuff. And so it's messy if you don't kill the character that gets redemption. You kind of, like, it's very hard to think of characters that have committed extreme acts of evil on the scale that Kylo Ren did, just objectively. It's very hard to justify, like, okay, so then they just get to what, run around the galaxy with their space girlfriend, or what? Like, they should... Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that they turned and saw the light and became a better person, but they should still probably be held some kind of accountable for their crimes, right? Right? Like, did the Jedi just not get held accountable for anything, even after the fall of the Jedi Order and stuff? Come on, think about it. So, like, it is... I think it's the easy way out to have Ben Solo die in a meaningful way, certainly, but ultimately to die. But I was disappointed that they did end up killing him. I mean, obviously, we've talked about how it'll probably be a long time before anyone from the sequel trilogy comes back for a movie, but I think they did cast younger on purpose for that reason. So, I don't know. But yeah, I am disappointed by the death of Ben Solo.
Mm-hmm. And I can definitely... It's something where I'm basically split down the middle on it. I'm just kind of overall happy that he got redeemed at all, especially knowing from, like, the Colin Trevorrow script, where he was just full-on villain the whole time, and I was just like, and I don't think that was the way to go for him. But with with him dying, what I really like about that is because I think that brings his arc full circle, and specifically to the "you're afraid that you'll never surpass Darth Vader." Is he doesn't surpass Darth Vader, he surpasses Anakin Skywalker. Is he does the thing Anakin wished he could have done, because Anakin didn't have that perspective. Anakin went to the dark side and it doomed his relationship with Padme, whereas maybe if he tried to listen to the Jedi teachings more and delve more into the light side, he would have found out about this force healing thing and he could have been able to save Padme. Kylo bringing that full circle and saving Rey through love, I think, is a good way to capstone the Skywalkers as an idea. Is that the ultimate end point of them is finally getting the thing Anakin most wanted. I really, really like that. I think that's perfect, like pitch perfect. It's just, how do you reconcile that with having a consequence, right? Does he do that and still live? And then you kind of, well, shit, that kind of hurts the respectability of the rest of it if you can just bring people back from their life willy-nilly. But then you get to the, okay, if he does die, you miss out on all the interesting redemption story you can do post that episode. And I do think there is stuff there. Dragon Ball doesn't get to delve into it that much because Vegeta's kind of just tolerated, whereas in a story like Star Wars they would delve more into like the political ramifications on how the Resistance would feel about this. Would Rey try and hide him, etc., etc. There's definitely a lot of meat there that I think it has to have been a conversation they had. I just feel like when they're thinking about this being a 9-film saga you can watch from beginning to end, it does, leaving Kylo Ren alive just makes you want a 10th movie. it just really makes you want to tell that story because it is so good. So I feel like almost knowing Star Wars had to have like at least an end for now, 9 films straight, as much as we'll say that because we're going to probably get an X eventually, like you said. I think it probably was the best thing, just to like, okay, let's give him a death and give it as most of a death as possible. Tying into that though, and kind of one of the things that become probably the thing that makes him most tied to the protagonist. What do you think of like how his dynamic with Rey changed over the course of the things? The fact that they got to kiss at the end of it. How's that going? Yeah.
No, I mean like the Rey ship I thought was always very interesting. I kind of didn't see it in Force Awakens, but then by the time you got to Last Jedi and there was just like the awkward tension between them, the shirtless Kylo scene, of course.
Their hand touch sex scene.
Yeah, like, oh my, they're holding hands. How scandalous. I can't believe they haven't done that as the Star Wars sex animations and stuff, is like the the galaxy-wide hand job scene or something. Like that is, I think, one of the more interesting ideas of the series. I did like the fact that he got to die happy, like kissing someone that genuinely loves him. I still think it's sad as shit for Rey. Like, God, you know, there's maybe 5 minutes of the movie left after that, and like we end on lesbian kiss for half a second so it can purposely be edited out, and then she takes the lightsabers to Tatooine for reasons, and then just like Rey Skywalker. I'm like, I mean, that was like, it didn't feel like she got to really deal with that for very much, or we didn't get to see her deal with it at least, which is a little disappointing, to say the least.
I definitely can agree with that. Like, even if it was just like an extra like 30 seconds or something of just Daisy Ridley on that scene where he falls and just linger on it for a little bit more, I think would have been enough. And they've obviously shot that because they probably cut that a little bit to save the runtime.
I get in that lesbian kiss, you know.
Yeah. I'm just like, just stretch that out 30 seconds more, and I think that helps you deal with it a little bit. I do think that is an issue. But one thing I feel like does, at least in my view, and I know a lot of fans don't agree with me in this, I know specifically like Steve is like very adamant against this, but I'm kind of, how I always view in Star Wars is Yoda is right. When Yoda says to Anakin, don't spend all this energy angering and festering on feeling on how you should try and keep these people alive. Live, have people while you're alive, but when they die, they're dead, and you just need to accept that, and you need to be able to move on and not let that drag you down, especially if you're a Jedi, where that can literally fuck you up, like going to the dark side if you have those thoughts on the thing so much. What makes it work for me as well is because it's a universe like Star Wars, you kind of don't really cheat death, because we don't see it, but because he vanishes at the end along with Leia, and then we see Leia, the only implication I have is, well, yeah, he becomes a Force ghost, so he's more
weird
powerful.
that they don't show it, you know?
Yeah, that is something I'm like, maybe they're like, well, maybe we'll save it to bring him back in a comic or something, because that would be a definitive capstone, right? Is if you show him as a Force ghost, that's it, there's no way back. You show him disappearing, there's a couple of things you can BS to bring him back if you need to.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but yeah. Especially when you got like Luke grabbing the lightsaber kind of thing, where we've established that Force ghosts can make like physical connections with the world, which may have been established in the comics at some point, but I don't think we'd ever seen it on film.
Well, I mean, Obi-Wan kind of moves away a leaf when he walks to sit down.
Oh, okay, my bad. All right, so I guess I'm wrong. That's kind of funny. I never caught that before then. Because it's so obvious to me that Alec Guinness isn't actually there with Mark Hamill, or if he is, they did it a much more complicated way than I would have thought they did, but whatever.
You just see him like, whoop. It's so casual as well. It's just like, let me just move this to sit on the log. So Leia's your sister. It's That's just like, funny. Okay, there's no pomp or circumstance.
That's pretty funny. Okay, then that makes me think about how they shot that, but that's neither here nor there. As far as like Kylo being a Force ghost, I'd be fine with that. I think that would probably be the way to go, because then you can still have like the redeemed thing. He and Rey can still, you know, talk, though it makes things a little extra sad and tragic. Rey and her ghost boyfriend. That's just...
I mean, look, this is a universe where the Force can make a child in Shmi Skywalker, and we've established people can touch. I think, look, the Reylos have been very creative, okay, with what they want to see with, what's that film? With Sixth Sense or something, where it's just like, it's the ghost boyfriend, and it's
just Ghost.
Yeah. It's
fucking Rey and Force Ghost Kylo Ren making pottery together, and it's just extra sexy.
I think that's the way.
Maybe he helped her. There we go. That's the fan film we need, or the fan comic we need. We need the scene from Ghost with Rey and Ben Solo, but they're making her lightsaber together.
That's
it's like, oh, you should make it yellow. That'd be super fucking cool. Really, Ben? Really, yellow? You think so? Yeah, fucking blue and green are so overplayed. Do yellow. I was thinking maybe like purple or something. No! It's dumb!
I mean, I'd see it.
Yeah. There you go. Well, you're the one with the fucking girlfriend with the Rey cosplay, and you got your Kylo Ren cosplay. You're the one that has to make it.
Oh, snap. He got me. Well, now I'm just gonna have to blue film myself.
I can teach you the Force Ghost thing in Vegas. I've done it for the I've done the exact same kind of thing for the hologram transmission before, so I could do the Force Ghost thing pretty easily.
Well, there you go. That's gonna come to a Geeky Gentleman channel near you eventually. Then we're gonna have to do it if you've got that. On the topic of Kylo Ren living, though. A lot of people kind of get, I don't know, angry, or especially like the people who wrote vehemently just like, oh, the sequel trilogy is not canon, it's only the original trilogy, about the fact that Han and Leia had a son that turned out like that. Do you think there's anything to that, or do you think it just makes sense? And how do you feel about his relationship with like Han? And we don't get to see that much with Leia, but how those three as a family dynamic.
I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense that they would be. It wouldn't be just a happy-go-lucky space family. I don't think. I don't think it ever could have been, to be honest. And so yeah, I kind of do think that the kid was kind of destined to suffer in one way or another. He doesn't have Han's charisma. He doesn't have Leia's. Oh, what's the word I want here? Wit. He's kind of like this. Not black sheep.
He's just not confident in himself, because I think we do see what he could have been when he comes back to the light for that bit where he's kind of got the Han Solo swagger when he's fighting the Knights of Ren. That's the Ben Solo that could have been, right? If he didn't get corrupted by the dark side and kept doubting himself, he probably could have had both of those things.
That is the thing, is he feels so like he never quite measured up to his family in any way. He's this like kid that just is always kind of overshadowed by the larger than life figures in his family around him. You know, that's kind of where I land on that.
And I feel like especially something else we probably should mention, because it's just as vehemently despised, or I guess just controversial, is his relationship with Luke, his uncle, and how that went down. That's the one thing I definitely, if I could choose any content I want more of, is I just want more of what Luke and Kylo Ren's early adventures were like, because they spent a lot of time together. When like Leia says like they sent Ben off the Jedi boarding school with Luke for the majority of the years. We don't know what age it was, but I imagine it was pretty young. And they spent the most time together, and then it ended the way it did. And that's, I'm just like, that's an entire story that kind of happens off screen, but we see how badly it affects both of them, not just Kylo Ren. It completely changes Luke's entire worldview.
Oh, absolutely. Luke, goes all Ben Kenobi / Yoda because of it, right? And it is just incredibly tragic. I don't know. Like I agree. I would like to see more of that, but I think I just worry sometimes, because Star Wars is such a deeply personal thing, because it is such a big cultural landmark, that I have a hard time accepting stuff from media that's not the films. And I think that's why you see so much of a backlash toward the films, because even if I don't like the film like I do with some of the prequel stuff, and like I kind of have with Rise of Skywalker, I still accept it as, okay, but that's the story. But I don't extend that to the comics and other media. I just can't, because those things are written and handled by people with very different sensibilities about Star Wars than what I have. And so the like headcanon nature of Star Wars kind of takes over, and I think that's part of what you're seeing with this kind of like fan outrage and ownership of the material. That's part of why I think you've seen such a backlash against the sequel trilogy. And so, while part of me is like, yeah, I'd like to see more content of like Luke and Ben, I don't necessarily trust most Star Wars writers and comics and other media to touch it.
Because it's such a delicate line to balance, right? It's like Last Jedi kind of, at least in my opinion, is like really does that tightrope of like, how can we make Luke Skywalker a human? How can we make him a real person and with flaws and character, but still eventually keep him as this figure of hope? And how can we make Kylo Ren be a bastard sometimes, but how can we at the same time keep it inherently sympathetic? And having both of those things where they're in that situation and we see both of their point of views and then we see the truth is entirely indicative of how you could have messed that up. Is if Kylo Ren just was the one who attacked Luke, then you don't feel sympathy for Kylo Ren anymore. If Luke's the one who just attacks Kylo Ren in anger, then you don't feel sympathy for Luke Skywalker anymore. You have to have a very tight walked middle ground between them, and almost more than Obi-Wan and Anakin was, where we see their dynamic in Clone Wars, and it's inherently tragic, but that Obi-Wan saying he was a good friend leaves a lot more wiggle room for people to mess with and build up the tragedy of their dynamic, because a lot of Anakin's fall happens outside of Obi-Wan knowing. He kind of just knows at the last minute in Revenge of the Sith, and that's the tragedy of their conflict.
If into the security archives you go, only pain will you find. One of the best lines in the...
I can't watch anymore.
One of the best lines in the prequels.
Uh-huh.
Yoda
It's
gets
pretty
some
great.
good fucking lines in those movies.
I'm telling you, man, the dialogue on that is mean for a reason, and people say it's funny, and sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just legitimately iconic dialogue. like some of those things. But like, you do that with Luke and Ben, and because Luke is his master in they're not as close in age, so it's a much more uncle, and it's like a familial bond there, and Luke hasn't had any other Jedis being able to tell him how to do it properly. Like, he kind of got winged by Yoda and Obi-Wan as they taught him a little bit, and then they both died. Luke's having to make up on his own, and what are the pratfalls there, and how long does he spend with Ben? Does he pick up on signs? Is Luke a bad teacher? Is Ben a bad student? Is it a bit of A, a bit of B? There's just so much that can go wrong if you're not on your A game writing that story. I do really agree. I feel like as much as I would like, I'd love to see it, there is a lot more inherently that if it went down, it's like, oh, okay, I saw that and now I don't believe it happened. There, never have to see that again. So you're right there. I think that's, at least for the moment, what we'll see in terms of Kylo Ren's futures. We'll just see more of like, because that's what we're getting in the comics at the moment, the rise of Kylo Ren, as we're fleshing out his fall. I think we'll see more past stuff. Eventually, I think we're at least going to have to see him as a Force ghost in something. Just because that thread's just left there dangling. And if we get another post The Rise of Skywalker EU, and then when episode 10 gets out, that gets all retconned and we go rewrite history over and over again, that could happen or something. I'm just curious to see that once a couple of years pass and people just kind of get over the initial trauma, I guess, or just the initial it being outrage and the fires of passion are out, so it's still recent, like the Blu-ray comes out, people watch it multiple times. I'm curious to see what the view on Kylo Ren will be, because at the start it was kind of overwhelmingly positive, with like a few naysayers because he wasn't as cool as Darth Vader, but now we've kind of directly split down the middle from what I've seen. I'm really curious to see what that will be like in the dawn of history.
No, I agree. I would like to see more of that as well. So I don't know if there's really anything to do for recommendations for Kylo Ren, right? Like, it seems kind of on recommends.
Yeah.
Like, you watch the movies. There's like a couple tie-in comics and stuff, but he hasn't like they've purposely avoided doing much in that era until the movies were over, at least.
And we're just now starting to get into that. But I will probably say is this, Kylo Ren, at least in the comic front, is going to become the next Darth Vader, where he's going to get like 5 ongoings over the years. I can see that happening completely, because they've already kind of ran the Vader well dry. But Kylo Ren's got all this new content, and he's a big marquee name character. So I think Kylo Ren's going to be the one who's going to get a lot of comics. So you won't worry about content about him. It's just if it will be good content or not.
Right? That's the thing I'm worried about. All right. Let's hear. Who are we going to talk about next time? Can I do this without going to a DC character? It's just so my fucking fallback move.
He's just such a disappoints me.
I know.
Honestly.
All right, you know what? Fuck it. Bulma, bam. Take that.
Bulma.
Yeah. Bluma, as some people pronounce it. I'm like, okay, says Bulma on her shirt, but okay. Alrighty. Yeah, we'll do Bulma next week. Suck on that, nerds. Alright, everyone, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I am the champion of the oppressed.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.